Welcome to your Digital Mentor podcast. I am your host, Emmanuel Arporn, coming to you from New York. In this episode, we'll be discussing and exploring the ways in which we can communicate and engage about science with the public. One of my producers, Dr. Matimba, shared a tweet with me a couple of days ago, and it was a tweet by Dr. Madupai, who is a researcher in translational epidemiology and global health. And he tweeted, "All scientists need lessons on science communication and public engagement." And when I looked at sort of the comments below it, it was very interesting because many people had different perspective on this topic, and even some sort of went to make references to the failure in communication being one of the reasons that many people have not been vaccinated in the case of people who have access to vaccines. Today, we have two cool guests, Dr. Arporn Valvinson and Dr. Monica Abrudan, who actively work and engage with communities to communicate and share science through their interest and work. So Dr. Arporn Wangwiwatsin is a lecturer at Konkane University. His scientific endeavor is primarily on parasitic diseases, bile duct cancer, and genomic development. And public engagement is an outlet for her artistic side. And she also goes by Koi. And Dr. Monica Abrudan is a training development lead in the Center of Genomic Pathogen Surveillance at the University of Oxford. And she develops courses in pathogen genomics and bioinformatics. She became interested in science communication during her PhD in microbial ecology and evolution at the University of Manchester. And it's really nice to have you. So welcome, Koi and Monica. It's really nice to have you with us today. So we'll start off with Monica. Could you please tell us a bit about yourself?
Hi, Ella. Thank you for the invitation. So I started my career as a computer scientist. I graduated from the Faculty of Computer Science at the Babeș-Bolyai University in Romania. And soon after my graduation, I got a software engineering job. I decided this is not my call and decided to pursue further my education. During my master's degree, I took a bioinformatics course and a game theory course. This is when I realized that computer science can be applied to many domains. So I took on later a fellowship of interdisciplinary research in systems biology, so applications of computer science in biology.
Thank you, Monica. And then Koi, could you also tell us a bit more about yourself?
Sure, and thanks for having me here. Well, right now I'm a lecturer and I've been working in Konkane University for about 4 years. Before that was doing a PhD at the Sanger Institute and working on the parasitic worms, blood fluke, and the transcriptomics. Before that, actually, my interest was on animal behavior. And as a sideline, I was then also interested in human behavior and psychology. And before that, I was more interested in architect and design. So my interest was kind of shift over time. I guess it's always a bit of like art and science inside me.
Thank you, Koi and Monica, for telling us a bit about yourself. So to begin sort of our conversation, I want us to focus a bit on education. A couple of weeks ago, I had a conversation with a friend and she wanted to learn and research more about sort of academics like science and math and how we were taught in French and English in our African countries and not in our mother tongues. And this made me think of your article, Monica, on beer and science, and how you sort of approach learning the natural sciences as you transition from engineering. In your article, you mentioned that science takes place mainly in English, which makes it difficult for non-English speakers. So could you please tell us about your experience as a non-native English-speaking researcher and tell us about your motivation for writing the translated science blogs? And then if you could maybe elaborate a bit on sort of how you use the experience to sort of transition into your current work that you do.
Yeah, so this is a nice question. Thank you. So I started learning about bioinformatics around year 2010. Back then, there was no mention of bioinformatics in media or in university in Romania, or at least where I studied in that part of the country. So I was really fascinated about this topic. At the University of Manchester, we had very good lecturers. We had very interested colleagues and so on. But when I went back home to speak to my family or to my friends from university, they didn't understand the word I was saying. They didn't understand the topic. They didn't understand English, but they didn't understand the topic in the first place. So I decided that there is a gap there. So probably I should start to know how to explain bioinformatics concepts in simple language, but also to explain these simple concepts in Romanian for some people who didn't speak English. So this is how I identify the gap.
Nice. And so this is how you sort of transitioned it into writing blogs to share with your community and your family?
Yes. So in the beginning, I actually did it for myself to cement some of the concepts. So we were asked in the university to read a science article every week and then summarize it to our peers. Our peers were also students, so they had higher education, right? But in order for me to explain these concepts to them, I had to write them down, and then simplifying it, translating them, I said, this is also good for me.
Thank you. And I think as an undergraduate in biomedical engineering, I also had difficulties sort of reading science articles. And if I had thought of maybe sort of translating that into a blog, maybe that would have been sort of a really cool approach to sort of looking at things. And Koi, you grew up in Thailand. And a quick question, is science taught in English? And in your opinion, do you think that language affects one's learning of science? Or does learning in your mother tongue affect how you understand and innovate as you currently work in learning about worms and their impact on us?
Yeah, so the way science was taught in Thailand in my time, well, it depends which schools you go to, but in most cases, I would say it was taught in Thai, but some of the specific terms, then that would be in English. So there was some specific scientific term that we just use English, and then there might be like in the bracket Thai translation. In terms of learning, I would say, again, it depends on how science is being taught. So in some cases, you teach students to think and to discuss. And in that case, then language could be a barrier. If students doesn't have English as their mother tongue, and let's say they go abroad, they study science abroad, and that will be some, well, cultural shock, but also the language barrier shock as well. So that would just take time to learn if we talk about discussion and some of the philosophical thinking. But some of the scientific concept, I think once you learn it in your mother tongue and then that concept is there, it would help you sort of transfer what you learn in one language to other language as well.
Yeah, growing up in Ghana, we learned science and math in English. So it's kind of nice to sort of hear that in Thailand, that you learn it in like your local language, which is kind of really cool. Delving a bit into your work, I know you work with worms. I have no knowledge about it. And I think it's really fascinating. But how does sort of your work in worms sort of connect with public engagement? Because it's really interesting to sort of see if, because people know about worms and sort of, oh, like you get sick and like you have like a parasite in your stomach, that would then help maybe create a transition or a segue into sort of allowing you to engage more effectively with the public. Is that so? If you could elaborate a bit more on.
So worms, and when you talk about worms and parasitic worms, I guess people always have that ew kind of feeling. But when you talk about public engagement, right, is how do you make people feel like ew, but they want to know more? So it made me think of one of these public engagement events I was involved in, and I talk about parasite, and we have like a couple of specimens that the kids and family can look at. So kids will pick up one tube and then they'll be like, what is this? And I'm like, this is the parasitic worms and they do so and so. This is how you get infected. And they'll be like, ew. And then they put it down. But then they pick up the next one and then they continue like, so what is this worm? And they want to know more. So yeah, partly it's about, is sort of directly relevant to their health. I think if they travel, if they eat sort of exotic food, and is there any risk? That what they want to know, right? So I think when it's relevant, directly relevant to health, that's some easy access point to get people interested. In Thailand is sort of closer to home. People get infections with parasitic disease. I would say lots of the diseases that we study are tropical diseases. Especially, say, in Khon Kaen, we say we are capital of one of the parasitic worms, so the liver fluke that can cause cancer. And we kind of say, in a proud and not so proud way, that we are capital city of this parasite. So when we talk about these worms and the cancer that they can bring, it's kind of directly connect to people, and sometimes they can relate to their family. But then that is a different way that you're going to talk to them, because for some people, it might be a sensitive issue because some people in their family might have the disease rather than is it a risk if I travel abroad, if it's a risk if I eat exotic food, but instead it's something linked to their family. So it's kind of a different tones that you use to deliver. But yes, worms, always some EU factor that there'll be some attraction that you don't want to know about.
Yeah, I think it's really cool that you're able to sort of engage with the public in sort of that sense. As we were talking, it was making me think of crowdsourcing because I currently work in crowdsourcing and our team utilizes it as a platform to engage and connect with people who have a vested interest in a topic because it really impacts them. So, for example, in a previous work that our team did, they were finding ways in which they could encourage you to do more self-testing in HIV. And then they used the crowdsourcing activity where they had a designathon, and then they had the youth come in and sort of brainstorm and look at the issue and then come up with ways in which they could go into their respective communities and encourage people and youth to self-test for HIV, which I thought that was really, really cool. And sort of that is similar to your work. And so we know that engaging with the public has a lot of potential and it's very powerful if you're able to connect with different audiences about a particular topic. Monica, if you could tell us, and also Koi, but if you could tell us about particular engagement activities that you've worked on and which ones you're really sort of passionate about, so our audiences can get to sort of see sort of how communicating with the public can manifest sort of in real life and in different sort of situations and circumstances.
So I participated in quite a lot of science communication activities. Some were online. As I said, I started with a blog, but later I transitioned to face-to-face activities. And even later, I thought that it would be nice to build networks of science communicators or of people that can organize science communication events. So this is two lessons I learned, that face-to-face is much more powerful than blogging or talking on the radio or vlogging or anything like that, or writing articles. So this is first. And second, it's very important to build a network of people that organize science communication events. So in science communication, it's not just about us scientists talking to the public. There are many people around us that take care of logistics, of marketing, social media, editing, or just giving feedback for anything we say and so on. So it's important to make a network, even with friends first, with family, and then it expands. And then anytime you want to organize a new event, then you just need to find the scientist, and then the operation goes by itself.
Yeah. And you say you realize that face-to-face is important. How so? Like, how do you measure your impact that you've had in terms of engaging with public and to see if what I did is very effective? And so how did you know that sort of face-to-face is sort of has more impact? Because I think it's sort of, you can say like face, but how exactly do you sort of like measure the impact of your activities? For example, blogging or vlogging versus sort of your interactions with people in person.
So with blogging and vlogging will be the number of reads or the number of people that access your page. And there are some Google Analytics, for example, you can see how many people have accessed your page or watched your videos and so on. With face-to-face is more subjective. So it's more about how many questions you receive, how many visitors you have on your stand, how many follow-up questions are there on email, for example. Sometimes we would hand in questionnaires at the end of the activity, or when we worked in schools, the teachers handed in questionnaires for their students, for their pupils, and then forward those to us. So it depends.
Yeah, so sort of depending on like which platform you're using, then you could sort of find different ways to measure. And Koi, what are some activities that you've engaged with the public that you've been very passionate about? And also, if you could elaborate a bit more about maybe the steps in which you sort of went about implementing the activity, if you could tell us a bit, because I think there's one thing saying, oh, let's engage with the public, and there's another saying, how do you go about actually doing it?
I think, like Monica, I have been doing public engagement in a few different forms, in different formats. Actually, writing is probably one of my weakest fronts, so I'm gonna learn something from your blog that I'll look into afterward. But yeah, mostly what I did was, actually my public engagement start from running a science camp for primary school students. That was when I was very, very young. I didn't even know what public engagement mean or science communications mean. I had no idea. It would look fun. So it was like a camp, and we ran some science activity, and students came and have fun and have some sense of impressions that science is fun. So in that case, the way we look at the impact was just feedback from the teacher and how the students change their behavior, change their attitude toward the science class after they attend our science camp. But face to face, yes, that made me think of one of the events. It was, and you heard of this fame lab where you had this 3 minutes to talk about science, and it was essentially a competition. And so you had this 3 minutes talking about science, and I was doing that back in Cambridge just for fun, just to get myself some practice on public engagement, on public speaking. But then also had some of that in Thailand as well. The impression then was, when I was doing public engagement, to me, I actually took it as one of my hobby. It was just a fun thing to translate complex stuff into more simple terms. And then when people kind of hear your story and then they understand the science and they have that spark in their eyes, it was just fun. Right? So I was just doing with that kind of feeling. But I remember after that Fame Lab event in Thailand, one of the audience, so this is more like, subjective, anecdotal impact, but one of the audience just came over and he said he kind of saw a different perspective in a scientist. So his stereotype for a scientist is that, we are all serious and proper and neat, and then they saw this pack of scientists on stage doing Fame Lab and do all this different energy that they didn't imagine that a scientist could have this kind of energy. And he said he had a thought of doing science. He enjoys science, but he didn't feel that research or like being a scientist is something that is for him, because he couldn't see himself as those scientists that he see as a scientist stereotype. And then he came to this event with lots of people doing engagement, and then he changed his mind. He was like, yes, maybe he would give it a try. Maybe he'll look into it more. And yes, to me that I would say that one of the impact that if you have a proper setup with organizer and thinking about all this questionnaire and feedback and maybe longitudinal studies, then that's kind of impact I think we can measure in the long run.
Yeah. And sometimes when you think of public engagement, at least when I was thinking about it initially, I was thinking about maybe going out into like a conference and like connecting with people. But you also are sort of a bit different. Like you have the blogging and then engaging with students. Are there any other sort of different audiences that you've engaged with in sort of other activities that you could sort of share with us to sort of see the different ways in which you could sort of engage with science? For example, maybe at a party. I'm joking. But what other activities have you sort of held or implemented that you've engaged with, maybe, for example, in your work with Monica, but also with Cora? Like, what other activities, if you could tell us more, so we could sort of see the different ways in which a scientist might be able to engage with the public, whether it's like inspiring students or sort of working in your local community with people who might not speak English, but still are able to effectively comprehend exactly what a research is if you're able to translate it.
So from the ends of the spectrum, I've tried explaining some of my work on antimicrobial resistance to my parents who are in their 60s and they don't really work in science. So I try to make it interactive and show them some of the software we are using on day-to-day work and how we apply this to distinguish between different types of bacteria and why is this important for public health and for how does it impact our lives. So this was a bit challenging. So once we crossed this bridge of them understanding my work, they started to listen more to what I was telling them about my work so they could understand. I tried this with some of my friends as well. I don't think I've been to a party where I start talking about my work. It's a good idea, but it didn't cross my mind.
Yeah, and when we're researching for this episode recording, we're looking at an article that sort of talked about communication toolkits that maybe scientists could sort of implement to sort of more effectively engage. And they sort of talked about how, like, maybe in writing, you could sort of flip their approach, because typically you have like an abstract, then you have a long background before you go to the methods, and then you go to the conclusion. But then they said sort of flip it over, because in many people, as you were saying, like if you're talking to your parents, are actually interested in sort of the impact, because that is where you get the connection, because this is how I can relate. then you can sort of maybe then go sort of reverse in sort of elaborating on sort of, oh, this is how I do it then, and this is how I go about it. So that when you were mentioning that, Monica, that was what I got me thinking about with the research that we had read about. So Koi, also if you could tell us more about some of your activities with maybe different audiences, because I know you said you've had years of experience, and when you were talking about the Farm Lab, were you I don't know if this is exactly connected, because you said if you won an award you would use it to sort of hire a flash mob.
Get me out of here profile. Gosh, you did do your research. Yeah, I'll tell you about that. Well, first thing, when you talk about party, that made me think of a public engagement I was involved in, and it was actually organized by the public engagement team at the Sanger Institute. So it was back when I was doing my PhD there, and we went to this event at the Wellcome Trust in London, and they had their reception party. I don't remember exact details, but they have reception party for some awarding events, and the public engagement team at Sanger took some public engagement event to the party. And basically what we did was, I think we had 3 activities. I remember only one. Sorry about that. Guilty. But that activity was, we had this pot with a cotton wool inside, and that cotton wool was soaked in a molecule that people with a certain type of genetics can smell that molecule, and it will smell like old socks, old wet socks. For people who doesn't have that versions of genetics, they will not smell anything. We go around with this pot with a cotton wool, I think it was actually this test strip, that paper that people usually like spray some perfume on. But in this case, we have this, old sock smell like molecule on. So we go around, we're like, we have some genetic tests for you. Would you like to have a try? And this is, reception party for we're drinking and having snack. We were like, we have this pot. And would you like to try this smell? And so they might try. We might give them some warnings, just be careful, don't sniff too hard, kind of thing. And then they are, chatting in a party in circles. So some people in that circle can smell certain thing in that pot, and they were like, ew, what did you just do to us? And some people will be like, we smell nothing. What are you talking about? And then that started conversations in that party circle. And then we can tell them a bit about science. And then we we let you enjoy the rest of the party. And then we invite the next conversation circle. So that was quite fun. So yeah, all those creative activities could happen. I remember there was, at that event as well, there was an actor. He was wearing a sort of a fur coat, not a real fur, of course. And he went around and he just asked people to stroke his arm, with that fur jacket. They were like, would you like to stroke my arm with that fur jacket on? And when people stroke his arm, he'll be like, oh, how do you feel? How did you feel when you stroke my arms? And it's all this weird and funny feeling, but you feel some comfort. You feel like you were stroking your pet dog, and then he starts talking about the stress and the hormones and how different texture affect your sensory and nervous system. And that is always a way to pull people into science. It's just about getting creative and just have fun and experiment. I think some people would just feel like this is so weird, but some people would feel like, okay, science can be fun and all funny. Yeah. What was the other questions? Oh, if I won an award. What did I say again?
So yeah, they said if you won an award, what would you do? And you said you might do science communication with a flash mob or an open theater.
Yeah, first, let me tell you the inspirations of what I wrote there. Again, this is back when I was in Cambridge, and I was at a city centre in their market. And it was around Christmas time, and then all of a sudden there was this, lively, jolly music coming from somewhere. And then there was penguin mascot on a one-wheel bicycle. And so 2 of them, they just circle around in the market square with all this jolly music. And then everyone in that market square was like, what is going on? And then they just scooted away and kind of waving for people to follow them. And then they went into a department store And essentially, it was their Christmas light switch on event. So they would use this penguin mascot to attract people. And honestly, this is totally honest. My first thought when I saw those two penguins at the market square was that I know at some point they are going to fall down from their bike, and then the jolly music would turn into a sad music. And then some scientist is going to come out and start talking about climate change. So that was my thought, honestly, when I saw the penguin. But of course, it was not. It was a Christmas light switch on event. But yeah, that kind of impression stick with me. And I just thought maybe we could use this flash mob to deliver science to like unexpected audience. Because we have Sci Festival, is great and it's fun, but it would attract people who are somewhat already want to know about science, families and kids. And I thought something like a flash mob could bring science to like unexpected audience. But then we need to think about the creative way to make them, not to make them feel like they are being forced to learn science, but just some surprise and like, that could be fun in science. And then maybe that's it. And then they might want to learn more in the future.
Yes. Thank you.
It's still yet to be done.
Yeah. And Monica, so as we've been talking, I'm thinking of like, science has so much potential it could offer the world, right? And both of you are scientists. Monica transitioning from an engineer as a software engineer into science and sort of being able to take the initiative to sort of share the work with your community, with your family, with your friends, so that they can sort of see the impact. So how do we encourage scientists to communicate and engage their communities and their different audiences? Because with a tweet that my friend shared, some scientists were saying like, why should we do that? Like, don't we have communicators there already to do that? So how do we encourage scientists to share their work, to communicate? In what ways can we do that? Or if your work has inspired other scientists, so how do we do that? So
I believe that science communication has to be fun, both for scientists and for the public.
Oh, fun for the audiences, but I never thought of fun for the scientists. But now you bring a sort of a unique perspective on this. So sorry, I interrupted you. Please continue.
So so it has to be fun in the both ways, right? So first, probably very little scientists would talk on their own in a public event for many different reasons. Many scientists are introverts, or they don't like to talk to public. They don't like to they're afraid of being challenged, right, by very simple questions and so on. But when you do this as a group with your friends scientists, then it's totally different. So we went with my colleagues at the Center for Genomic Pathogen Surveillance. We went to a school here. There were 5 of us. We built the activities. We presented the students. We all had courage to talk to the students. So it was nice. It was a day out practically. So it was nice. We enjoyed it. Also, when I organized the beer and science events, I didn't organize them on my own. I organized them with a large group of people. We start to share this hobby for science communication. And later, some of them wanted to apply for European Researchers' Night from the EU funding to organize further events and so on. So when they wanted to organize these further events, they would have a network of people to discuss how to write the proposal and how the activities would go and who present activities and so on. So I think it has to be fun on both sides.
Yeah. If you're writing the papers, and more often than not, it's not only you writing it, right? You work on it as a team. So then in sort of going out into sort of the community to engage with the public, why not go out as a team? Because there's this aspect that maybe is not talked about in terms of sort of in really interacting with people and sort of how that comes, like the psychosocial sort of aspect of it, like with fear, or like how you be perceived or how you be seen, or even how you can sort of translate your work. But if you go as a team, then that might sort of take away that factor of it. If you go as a team, then you can split up the work. And then as you sort of say, and then that doesn't feel so daunting because at least you have people around you could work with who back you up. So yeah, thank you. I hope our scientists who are listening to this episode are encouraged to go out as teams. So other sort of factors that they might sort of fear they might be able to overcome that. And as we come to the end of our discussion, I want to ask, you've highlighted these different activities, these interactive activities, and sort of clear sort of examples as to how sort of some ways in which scientists can go about communicating with different audiences. So in your experience, what are some tangible takeaways that scientists can take with them in terms of how they can go about interacting with different audiences, whether it's in a vlog or in a blog or in person? Our producers, Dr. Matimba, when we were sort of having a conversation about this episode, we were talking and then this came about in terms of how do you explain genomics to sort of people, for example, in her home country, the word, and even in mine, the word genomics does not exist. And I think, Monica, you even brought that up, like when you were explaining things to your family. So, and then she said, oh, like if I'm explaining genomics, I talk about references to like heredity and inheriting genes and then connect. So sometimes it's not only necessarily maybe about sort of, or writing a paper that would be more engaging, but even having the words itself to explain the kind of work you're doing might be a barrier. And that is just one aspect of it. So what are some takeaways that scientists can sort of like tangible things that based on your experience, scientists can use as a tool or as a platform to go about engaging with their audiences, whether it's in person, whether it's writing in paper, or sort of the different ways with a blog or a vlog? What are some takeaways that you've had from your experience working in diverse and different public engagement activities that you think are sort of useful for scientists to be aware about when they go about either trying or maybe even taking their first step, maybe having listened to this episode and B is fine. What are some things tangible things that you can take to use to engage more effectively with the public?
I can say the lazy approach is don't try to reinvent the wheel. So there are many science communicators out there. If you want to explain a concept that already been explained, like genomics, for example, even if you don't have the word in your native language, you can see how other people explain it. You gave the example of heredity, or Koi explained about the mutation that allows people to smell something or not. Yeah, so these are easy things that if they work for an audience, they might also work for your audience. And also practice is very important. So don't just do science communication once and it might work, it might not work. Try it 10 times, 20 times. In the end, you'll be perfect.
Thank you. And Koi?
Yeah, when you do something for the first time is always awkward and you feel like this is not for you, but try. I would say before we say no to anything, I would say maybe try it for a few times and see how your feeling change over time. And another thing, if you want to try public engagement, give it a try and maybe just find your own purpose of doing it, find your own reason for doing it. It doesn't have to be so big about contributing back to the society. That would be great. But if your purpose is just to have fun and to practice public speaking, to improve your communication skills, I think those are all fine. And find your own purpose. And there's always different platforms and events and opportunities for you to try it. And also, just because you run some event or some activities multiple times, it might feel a bit bored to you, but to your audience, different groups of kids, different group of family, this is new things to them. So always expect some fun. And finally, your audience can ask a very, very interesting questions, and it might make you rethink your research.
Yeah. So I guess it's a two-way street. You're sharing, but you're also hopefully getting something in return, whether it's learning how to speak more effectively or getting an idea for your work. But this is really good, sort of thinking about it, because people have done it, as you're saying, Monica, like people have done it. So don't stress about reinventing the way. If you could just go out, trying, as both of you have said, multiple times, practicing to sort of figure out like, oh, which way can I go about doing this? And if you try and it doesn't work out, try again. Finding your purpose for why you want to. It doesn't have to be grand. It could be a happy sort of interactive way, or it could also be grand in terms of wanting to share your work with the public, which is also good. And finding fun interactive ways to doing that, whether it's breaking the words down to your family or going about sharing the impact of your work first, or using socks or fur to get people to hook them into the research you're doing, and then finding as a segue or transition into talking about your research. And thank you for joining us, Monica and Koi. Could you please share with our listeners where they can find you?
I'm on Twitter and also on LinkedIn if you want to see my professional profile. My Twitter handle is Monica Abrudan, so name, surname.
And Koi?
I can be found on Twitter as well, Koi Wang.
Thank you. And for our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Please follow us on Twitter at mentor_podcast, where we'll let you know when new episodes are released. You can listen to us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and SoundCloud by searching your Digital Mentor Podcast. You can also reach us by email. So please send your comments and questions to inquiries@yourdigmentor.net. Again, inquiries@yourdigmentor.net. As always, information on this episode and how to reach us will be in the description box, including how to connect with our guests, Monica and Koi, and also links to more information and resources. And finally, our goal is for this podcast to be shared as a resource. So please remember to tell people about us. Thank you, Monica and Koi. It was really, really good talking to you and sort of finding a different perspective on how to sort of engage with public. So thank you for coming with us. And for our audience, we'll see you in 2 weeks.
This episode is supported by Advanced Courses and Scientific Conferences, a program which develops and delivers training and conferences that span basic research, cutting-edge biomedicine, and application of genomics in healthcare. Through engaging and networking, the events educate, inspire, and transform careers worldwide.
This episode is also supported by the Wellcome Sanger Institute. It undertakes large-scale research that forms the foundations of knowledge in biology and medicine. It uses the power of genome sequencing to understand and harness the information in DNA. The Sanger's discoveries are used to improve health and to understand life on Earth.